let's get started with and I'll step in for Luca, who's obviously got a bit of connectivity issues there. But Luca was just going to sort of introduce the session that we've got today. Really talking about Windows in the cloud, so virtual desktops and what they can offer us. And what we'll cover off today as we go through the session is we'll look at some of the current challenges that we're seeing for councils, in particular, like really focusing on the council aspect, where Microsoft have brought solutions to the table around AVD and Windows 365, and then cover off some of the key benefits around cost and security, etc. And Tim will walk you through that. And then we'll maybe project a little bit into the future, where workstations are becoming super important in the AI world as agents start to need a workspace in order to access websites and legacy applications and things like that. And then we'll sort of wrap up with some practical outcomes. By the way, I should do some intros. So I was stepping in there for Luca, but I'm Paul Heath. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of cubesys, and I was hoping to be sort of listening to this and relaxing a little bit, but we've had one of our key speakers, Gemma from Microsoft, have to call in sick today, so I'm stepping in to sort of bring some insights from that, please. But with that, maybe I'll hand over to the team to get started. Right? And George, I think you're doing the welcome to country.
Yeah, hey guys, George Zakowski, one of the said cloud consultants at cubesys, pretty much doing all things AVD, Windows 365, Azure migrations, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's me in a real quick nutshell. Just wanted to start off by saying we begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Gadigal land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present, and future emerging. Shabazz, over to yourself for a quick intro.
Thanks, George. Hi, everybody. My name is Shabazz Dar. I'm also a senior cloud consultant, working the same team as George. And my sort of main areas of focus are sort of Azure Cloud, AVD, Windows 365, Nerdio, things like that. Very, very similar skill set to George. So the way we're going to do the sort of format will be I'll kind of narrate the session, and I'm going to bring George and Paul in as our panel panel people to ask them some questions as we go along. So we obviously have Luca Farello on the call, who has joined us from Microsoft as an account exec at Microsoft. Gemma, unfortunately, was going to join us, and she's not well this morning, but we were going to have Gemma Peer. And now, obviously, Paul, CEO of cubesys, is gonna jump in for that. George Zakowski is also, you just introduce yourself, George, as well as myself. So we're going to be the panel, and just a couple of housekeeping things, I should say. So this is being recorded, so in case anyone does miss it, there's going to be a recording that'll be shared with all the people who signed up. Please feel free to use the chat window to ask any questions, and our panel and myself will answer where we can. We obviously have our experts on hand to answer those questions. And as I mentioned, the video and the content will be sent via email after the event. So I want to kind of start with a conversation. Now, obviously, this whole sort of discussion is around, we're going to get to sort of the AI part, but first of all, I wanted to kind of discuss and talk about some of the challenges that a lot of us, councils within Australia face. So there's a perfect storm of pressures, really. On one side, we have sort of the budget constraints. Funding can be tight, and every dollar spent on IT needs to be justified. At the same time, a lot of councils need to comply with the sort of strict security and sort of privacy mandates like IRAP and the Essential Eight. And this adds complexity and cost to sort of IT operations. And finally, then there's an expectation from communities for sort of digital first services as well. Citizens, we want faster, more accessible, and more sort of transparent interactions, right? And these three forces, budget, compliance, and community expectations, they intersect, and at the heart of that, as we can see, are those sort of council IT teams. And this is where the challenge lies. How do we modernize and innovate without breaking the budget or compromising security? George, I want to kind of bring you in at this point, if that's okay. Given the sort of intersecting challenges that we see, tight budgets, compliance, mandates, like I mentioned, Essential Eight, things like that, and those rising community expectations, how can councils leverage Microsoft cloud solutions, first of all, to strike that right balance, that's what it's about, the balance between cost efficiency, security, and those innovations. Are there specific strategies that you can recommend?
Yeah, look, definitely. I mean, if you look at the three bubbles there, right? So you got budget, compliance, community expectations. If you break them sort of up into, the smaller areas, when we look at budget constraints, a lot of organizations these days, a lot of local government councils tend to buy hardware as bulk, right? And sometimes that might not be sort of best fit because you've then got to go and maintain. You need extra additional people to then go and maintain networking, storage, SANs, all these other different components, right? Not just buying a server for something. Whereas when you start adopting Microsoft technologies or look at the Azure Stack, for example, you're jumping onto a pay-as-you-go model, right? So you're essentially buying or paying for compute resources, power in the cloud to do a certain task. And if you have things like automation to power on and power off workloads as demand grows, so for example, during work hours or whatnot, it's really beneficial to councils that are tight on budgets and things like that. You can look at moving workload to things like reserved instances for predictable workloads. You can leverage Azure hybrid benefits for existing server licenses, SQL licenses, that kind of stuff. And then you've got the added security benefit of things like Entra ID for conditional access, MFA, identity governance, all of that stuff, right? So once you sort of start jumping into the cloud, you have a world of additional benefits and features that you can leverage sort of once you've got your foot in there. When you look at things like compliance requirements, for example, a lot of councils have got compliance requirements, keeping data for X amount of years or being able to go back and retrieve certain things. You can leverage things like Microsoft Purview, for example, or Azure policies to automate compliance checks and enforce compliance and governance. You can use Azure automation and logic apps for patching, backups, any sort of automation task that you need inside the environment. And then, moving on, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is using things like Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 for secure remote work for end users or contractors that might need access into the environment. And then finally, for community expectations, we as end users, right, if you're in a local government, you want to be able to access services that's similar to the way you access banks or retail platforms online, right? So you want it to be fast, accessible online services. You want on-demand content, not just during office hours, right? Generally speaking, everyone's 9 to 5. If someone can reach out after hours, things like a missed bin collection, for example. You don't want to have to pick up the phone and talk to someone and say, hey, my bin hasn't been collected. If you can automate things like that and have servers in the background to go and process requests and some smart tools and AI to go and do that, everyone benefits from things like that, right? So we're talking about the end users here. So we essentially want communities to expect the councils to protect their data, to also be compliant and responsive with all of that. So I think that's where sort of all of that ties in with some of the expectations here that you've got on this slide.
I think what just stands out from what you mentioned it right at the start about the hardware and that management time alone. I mean, we've both come from on-premises backgrounds, right? Yep. Managing IT hardware is so time consuming. And I think that sometimes is a cost organizations and councils might not see, because the amount of time you spend, trying to fix a physical hardware problem or whatever, that in itself is saving a lot of time, and then in that saving a lot of cost, right? If you're moving that into the cloud because you don't have that hardware. So I think that was quite an important snippet there.
I mean, when you think about it, someone's going to come and unbox the hardware, someone's got to rack it, someone's got to set up power, UPS, storage, networking, switch, etc. It all just sort of adds up, whereas you can just literally click a button and you're done in Azure, right? And you don't need to worry 100%. About it. Yeah.
100%. So let's break down the challenges a bit more then, okay? So, from an overarching area, we've got business, economic, and technology, right? When we look at a high level, I know we've gone a bit specific there as well, but let's look at those three from a high level. From a business perspective, councils are under a lot of pressure to meet citizen expectations, as we mentioned, around those digital first services. You know, I'm a citizen, you're a citizen. We want faster, more convenient ways to interact with our local government, right? At the same time, the councils need to maintain those sort of service continuity, workforce changes, and that growing demand for remote work as well. And on the economic side, you know, budgets are tight. Funding, as we mentioned, for IT modernization, it can be very limited. And operational costs keep on rising. And every technology investment needs to be justified with sort of clear outcomes. And finally, before I'm going to bring Paul in a second, the technology challenges are very significant. George mentioned quite a few there. You know, many councils are still going to rely on those legacy systems, the hardware, and these can be very expensive and fairly hard to secure. Compliance, as we mentioned with IRAP and Essential Eight, adds that complexity about, you know, when moving to those cloud solutions. And, you know, without those automation and those predictive insights, you know, you're going to be spending more time on manual tasks, as we touched on towards the end. And these pressures all combined are sort of, you know, they make it clear why councils need to modernize, be more cost effective and secure those solutions. Just want to bring Paul in now. You know, we've outlined these sort of business economic and technology pressures councils are facing. From your perspective, what sort of practical steps can councils take to sort of overcome these challenges without sort of compromising that sort of service delivery or security? And where do you see the biggest opportunity for impact in those areas?
Yes, thanks, Shabazz. Do you know what I might start with is just by just a very quick bit of history on myself personally. Before setting up cubesys, I spent 15, 20 years first as an engineer and then as an infrastructure manager. And when we think about what AVD and Windows 365 brings to the table, it's a paradigm shift from where we used to be. That on-prem stuff that you guys were just talking about, and the challenges that we had with that. If you were trying to bring, you know, your Citrix and your RDS farms, you always struggled with that limited amount of compute that was available, and fitting that into a budget is always very expensive to do that. And you'd often be running at 60 or 70% of capacity, and then once a month or twice a month you'd have that like peak when you get up to maybe even burst above your capacity and have problems. And all that technology stack was very, very difficult to manage. What we're seeing now with Windows 365 and AVD is a huge shift, right? So that it's much simpler to manage, as the boys were talking about there, with that on-prem stuff. That being able to use cloud's elasticity to expand in and out is super important. The economics are better, as George's point around automation. We can close down resources when they're not in use and automatically expand up when we need them, right? And the technology stack, by being able to interface directly with Enter ID and the policies and things there, just make that end-to-end like management for us as IT professionals so much easier. So I think we can take on more of those business challenges, and we find new use cases all the time with Windows in the cloud, because it's got that elasticity and new capabilities. Things like third-party secure workstations, even high graphics. So if you've got people working in CAD type workloads and things, being able to use the GPU that's available in Azure means that we can provide really powerful desktops to these guys for short amount of times, or even as their daily driver. So the whole end-to-end solution, as you move away from those legacy on-prem like Citrix, RDS, or VMware solution around that towards Microsoft one, we get benefits in licensing and costs because you already own the license for Windows 11, and therefore you can use that in the cloud in the multi-session format, all through that technology stack I've just described. It's super powerful where we can go, right? And so to get started with that, what we often recommend to our clients is that we'll start with an economic assessment. Let's look at what you're using, and then work out what that would cost to operate in Azure, right? So as we move from wherever you are today to what you want to achieve in Azure, the cubesys team, we've done well over 100 projects in AVD and Windows 365. And so we put together a set of questions that we can ask clients to quickly ascertain what it would cost to run in Azure. Once we've got that number, we can have a sensible conversation with your business, but also we can then look at what programs we can leverage from Microsoft, because Microsoft, if we're moving into Azure, will help us fund that activity, right? And so we typically find anywhere between probably about 80 to 100% of the project to move into Azure can be funded by the programs available at Microsoft. So what we have at that point then is we've got a clear picture of what it will cost us to run once we have moved, right? And we've got the funding aligned to that to help us migrate. And so we can put together a timeline and look at some of the sort of technology challenges you might have with some of the legacy apps and things like that. And the team are obviously expert at doing that, having done that 100 times plus. And we can put together like an end-to-end solution for you to move across that. And then what we often find out when we just to finalize that is that there is new capabilities. What we find with AVD, Windows 365, is they become the Swiss Army knife, right? We can solve so many different problems, give access to different people at different places, right? So we often go into a client. I do remember one state government client in New South Wales, we went in there just to replace their Citrix farm. We left with 12 different points of solved for them. And that was because they needed all these high-end compute for engineers, and then sort of generic multi-session for some old legacy apps, and then all these other use cases for third parties accessing the environment came out of the woodwork. It was really great to see that move in that direction. Yeah. Does that answer what you're looking for, Shimaz?
Yeah, it does. I think what's important, what I've taken from that answer, Paul, is around the assessment capability. And it's not just, okay, just jump into these things. It's about these type of assessments that we do right at the start of an engagement. They can give you a lot of information around these challenges and what the proposed sort of solution and how it's going to overcome these business challenges, economic and technology. So definitely, and again, we've seen it, haven't we? The benefit of these type of assessments to give, even like to help you create a business case, right? As well, to help them create a business case. Say, look, how this assessment shows how we're going to be able to sort these challenges.
What I'd like to just say, but probably didn't articulate about those assessments as well, because sometimes I think you'll see an assessment and having been on the other side of the fence, a bit like, and when am I going to find the time, and what does it mean? How much is it going to cost? These things, we've done it so many times now that we've really optimized that thing. We've got a questionnaire that we send you. Probably takes you about half an hour to fill that in. We come back and do some calculations, and we usually got a couple of questions that need clarifying and something that we need to talk to you about. So we need a second half hour just to go through that, and then we're done. Right, we can write the report from there. So it really is quite. We've got all the counting lists all organised at the back end, so it's not a big burden. And I'd say that it's worth just doing anyway, right? Just to understand the economics of what it would take to run that type of workload. So we're looking probably about an hour of your time, right, in two half-hour blocks, and we're good to go.
It's definitely very streamlined. So look, we've spoken about the challenges, right? So I think it's now pertinent to talk about the solutions. And Paul's just touched on Windows in the cloud a little bit there, and I want to kind of go into a bit more depth about that. So we're talking about obviously AVD and Windows 365 and about these offering councils a way to modernize IT without heavy upfront investment as well. First, these solutions tackle budget constraints. And George mentioned, the pay-as-you-go pricing and the flexible scaling as well. Councils can right-size their environment and only pay for what they're going to use. Then we have the compliance, which is built in. Both AVD and Windows 365 fully integrate with that security stack. And again, George touched on a couple of those earlier. And that's going to support IRAP and Essential Eight requirements. This means councils can move to cloud without sort of compromising security. And finally, and George and Paul, I'm going to bring you both in a second. Finally, these platforms are going to enable that remote work and digital-first service. And that's going to meet those community expectations while maintaining that sort of service continuity. Staff can securely access the desktops from any device, anywhere. In short, Windows, in the cloud addresses those three major pain points that we've kind of already spoken about. George, I'm going to first just bring you in. I've got two separate questions for this. One to you, George, first. Now we've introduced Windows in the cloud, AVD, Windows 365. This is, you've done a lot with both these technologies. And as solutions to address sort of cost compliance and flexibility changes, from your experience, what are the key considerations councils should keep in mind when deciding between AVD and Windows 365? And how do these sort of platforms practically help councils achieve sort of compliance with the Essential Eight and so on?
Yeah, good question. Paul covered a lot of sort of use cases previously, things like GPU and whatnot. But essentially, when you look at ABD and Windows 365, I mean, they are kind of the same platform. One of them does a consumption-based model, whereas the other one is a fixed rate cost, right? So Windows 365, you pay a monthly flat fee, and that is exactly what you're going to be charged for the month. A lot of the times, some people might see Azure Virtual Desktop as more beneficial because they can scale up and scale down during business hours. So for some specific use cases, that might be more beneficial than a Windows 365 license, where workers work 9 to 5, and you would only run applications or remote applications or desktops during those business hours and then shut them down when the staff go home. Whereas Windows 365, on the other hand, is 24/7 around the clock, so it might be good for external contractors coming in to develop a platform, for example. Like previously in the past, you'd always hear about a SharePoint developer coming in so you'd give them like a desktop or whatever to go and do things to develop SharePoint back in the days. But the other thing as well is, you look at Windows 10 end of life, right? And if you are running ABD or Windows 365, you've got the extended support for for Windows 10. So there's a big shift from what I've seen in the past, where councils will have some sort of platform that runs on a specific operating system, or they haven't had the time to go and recreate platforms for the new operating system. There might be incompatibility issues, that kind of stuff. So you can also run some of those applications in extended support mode with some of these platforms here. So they're both sort of got their pros and cons, but overall, if you're struggling to move applications over to new operating systems, this might be something to consider using Windows 10 extended support for.
Thank you. Really, really good insights there. Paul, I just want to bring you in. I know, although we are kind of focusing on councils today, there are sort of other industries with similar challenges, right? And Windows in the cloud is addressing. Obviously, in your role as CEO, you come across a lot of different verticals. Mm-hmm. Is this what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. I think the use cases, like I said before, it's almost like a Swiss Army knife to solve problems. To George's point, there's those third-party contractors or permanent support engineers that you might have looking after a particular application stack or something that you need to give access to securely. The days of building them and sending out a laptop for them to work on in your environment so that you can control that security barrier. You don't need to do that anymore, right? Where we can give them a fully functional desktop with all the tools that they need in Azure that's secure and stays. One of the important things about these technologies, the workstation stays within the boundaries of your network, right? And so they're remotely accessing in and just really controlling that desktop. But the data and the desktop itself stays in your environment. That makes there's a big difference to how you're controlling the security and what tools you need to do that, right? Much more easy for us as IT professionals to control that than on an actual workstation that we've sent out to them. But like I said, across many verticals, I've touched on the engineering stuff and the GPU. I'm sure councils will probably have to work with ArcGIS or something similar, right? And need that high-end graphics capability. We see that in engineering and mining firms using that. We see things in kiosk mode for healthcare, right? Which might be something that would be interesting in things like libraries or other council aspects where you're interfacing and you need a lockdown kiosk. That is another scenario where virtual desktops can come in and provide that access in a secure and controlled manner, right? BCP is another one, right? So your DR and BCP. We saw that during COVID. A lot of the state government departments we worked with were able to replicate their full SOE, right? The full experience on the desktop through AVD. And that meant that when we had those snap lockdowns, people could go home and work from home with the full capability that they had at their desk physically inside of the office, right? So there was lots and lots of benefits. And of course, with all this stuff, because we are cloud-based, particularly in the AVD side, we scale up and scale back down, right? There's no commitment to the size and shape of your virtual desktop environment. On the Windows 365 side, if you've got that more permanent requirement and a one-to-one relationship with the desktop, there's a lot of use cases where that Windows 365 solution becomes very important. But yeah, we're seeing it across lots of industries. I can't think of an industry that we don't sort of haven't been able to find a use case for. Right? So.
Yeah. 100%. So, look, we've kind of spoken about the problem. We've kind of introduced Windows in the cloud now. I think let's look at the outcomes councils can expect, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want, right? We want an actual tangible outcome from this from these discussions. So what can councils expect when adopting Windows in the cloud solutions like AVD and Windows 365? So first, we saw cost efficiency as a problem. By moving desktops to the cloud, I think councils are able to optimize license and infrastructure costs, right? George and Paul have both touched on that. There's no need for expensive on-premises hardware refresh cycles, and that sort of pay-as-you-go pricing that we mentioned, that's going to ensure that you only pay for what you use, right? Secondly, we've got that security and compliance. So what's the outcome here? These platforms that we've spoken about, Windows in the cloud, fully integrate with that whole security stack, right? Microsoft Defender, XDR, conditional access, and all those compliance frameworks. And again, this is going to make meeting those IRAP and Essential Eight requirements, for example, much simpler and more consistent as well. And finally, that operational agility. Deployment's rapid. We've got so many examples where in a matter of weeks we've deployed both AVD and Windows 365. With that rapid deployment, those automation capabilities that we're going to talk a little bit more about shortly. Your IT team in the council, they're able to have that sort of repetitive tasks like patching and provisioning made much simpler and much quicker. This means more time for those strategic projects. And finally, I want to touch on the enhanced productivity as well. Staff can access Microsoft 365 apps, those collaboration tools from any device and anywhere. And this supports sort of remote working and those important service deliveries to the community. George, I just want to bring you in. This is a bit off the cuff question. Just want your experience with cubesys on that rapid deployment, because again, you've done a lot of these deployments, right? And just give me some examples of that rapid deployment and
Yeah. Look, when COVID hit, this is going back to WVD really early on. We were able to get a government, a local council or government. I think it was a government down in South Australia. From POC to production within 2 weeks, right? That's literally how quick we can scale out this environment. As with Windows 10, Windows 11, sorry, I should say Windows 11, multi-session, right? You need to, as long as you can rebuild your SOE quickly, we can then go ahead and publish that securely with the right governance, checks in the background, security, and cost efficiency by scaling up and scale down as needed during business hours or after hours or whatever. There are a lot of different use cases for Windows in the cloud technologies. So things like Paul mentioned GPU workloads. So I actually have a council over in New Zealand who's using GPU workloads to go and do some sewage water runoff automation and I guess what's the word? So, some modeling for things like that. They don't want to go and pay for high-end laptops because after a couple of years they're going to have to go back and refresh them, right? Whereas this time around they can just simply choose a new SKU and then away that they go again, and they do that pay-as-you-go model.
So George, do you mind if I jump in there, because I want to put my sort of exec or manager lens on that. When we talk about moving so quickly, we don't have to, of course, right? But we have had clients where we really needed to move. I remember not too long ago, George, we had that aged care provider that needed to move 4,000 because their Citrix farm was falling over, literally hadn't been maintained and was having some problems. So we moved them to AVD in a very, very short time and got 4,000 people in the production, right? So when we do things like that, though, obviously as an exec or manager, you want to make sure that your risk is in control and that we've got a good level of controls around them, some security perspective and things like that. The reason we're able to do that so quickly in AVD and Windows 365 is we don't migrate, right? We build side by side and we test. So we start with a whole clean greenfield environment, and then the applications that you need to use inside of that desktop or that SOE, we rebuild it in Azure, right? And by doing that means we don't touch production at all while we're doing that. And we go and test and we get some users on there and just make sure it's all working tickety-boo, and then we cut across. And of course, because they're side by side, if there was a problem and you're moving that fast, you could always come back, right? We're changing an icon on a desktop. The main challenge we have in those situations is not the technology, it's the change management of the users and getting them. So what we often do in those, and that aged care situation is a prime example of that. We replicated, even though it maybe isn't as modern or new as we would like to go, we replicated the user experience. So they had the same type of icon in the same place in the start menu, so that there was minimal change management for the users, and we could like flick them across. So AVD's Windows 365, it's a technology stack that is, you can be quite aggressive on the timelines for and move quickly, right? And grab those benefits early, because we can really control the risk profile of the project.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we've covered the challenge, and we've covered sort of where we are now with and the benefits of this Windows in the cloud concept. Let's look ahead now, and I think Paul mentioned it in his introduction. Looking ahead, automation is going to be a game changer for councils, and we've mentioned automation already. George mentioned. I want to go into a bit more detail around it. It's not just about saving time; it's about freeing up IT teams to focus on more strategic initiatives rather than repetitive tasks. So, an example, predictive maintenance can automate patching updates, reducing downtime, and that's going to improve service continuity for the community. Automation also helps resource optimization, so councils can use AI-driven insights to scale workloads dynamically, ensuring cost efficiency and without over provisioning. Which, again, coming from the on-premises background, I know that's always been a major bugbear of mine. Over provisioning. Compliance reporting is another area where automation can shine. Instead of manual audits, councils can automate IRAP and Essential Eight compliance checks. That's going to reduce risk and administrative overhead. George, I'm going to bring you in here. Automation, it promises to free up IT teams and improve efficiency, but councils often, in my experience working with councils, they often struggle to prioritize where to start, right? From your perspective, what are the most impactful automation use cases for local government IT? Whether it's compliance reporting or patching or resource optimization, and how do these translate to sort of real benefits for councils and the communities?
Yeah, good question. I think it's always going to be resource optimization. That's going to be the most efficient, because everyone looks at costs, right? How much is something going to cost us? Why are we running stuff 24/7 when it's not beneficial to the business? That kind of thing. But looking at like patching, reporting, when you run those kind of reports in a Windows in the cloud solution, the results are instantaneous, right? It's not historical data. It's now then. VMs are audited, each time that they're run. You don't have to worry about, a laptop gone offline for X amount of days and then we need to go and figure out what's going on. You've also then got those features in Windows 365 where you can sort of lock down a laptop for, any sort of cyber security leaks and that kind of stuff, where you want to go back in and audit it for a period of time to see, in case you have some sort of data leak or something like that. But automation is, I think, there's really no limit to what you can automate, right? It's just how creative you want to be around something. You mentioned repetitive tasks. So if something is repetitive, can there be an automation for it? Can Windows in the cloud solve that automation? Are there any sort of compliance policies or anything like that we can put in the background to stop new problems from reoccurring, to then go back and have to fix them? So if we can prevent the problem in the first place with like a compliance policy or some purview order or something like that, then we don't need to create an automation for it, because it's sort of gone from the get-go.
Hey George, just thinking about some of those real-world examples, right, for the audience that might not be aware of the type of automation we do in AVD, like what springs to mind is things like the log-on storms. Anybody that's run a VDI environment for any sort of length of time know that you get hit early in the morning as everybody comes in and logs on, and then you need more resources then. And then as the day trails on, it starts turning Talk about how we control that with automation.
Yeah, look, good one. So we use Nerdio for a lot of our AVD deployments and Windows 365. So Nerdio is pretty much the bee's knees when it comes to any automation for AVD. So to answer Paul's question, when it comes to things like log installs, there is automation inside Nerdio where it'll go ahead and increase a storage account to a specific size to allow that extra throughput and bandwidth and IOPS, so that when that log install happens in the morning, users are not waiting, a minute or two to go and log in. It's actually optimal. And then as people start logging off throughout the day, Nudio will then go back and scale that environment back down. You've got a whole bunch of other automations for things like, spinning up and spinning down virtual machines, bursting beyond capacity. So you might have 10 servers that cater for 100 users, for example, but then out of nowhere, you might get an additional 10 or 20 people log in. You can burst beyond that capacity and provision a VM on the fly or on demand or just in time to cater for those users. You can also look at things like, deleting VMs when they're no longer needed, so that you save on disk costs. You can look at changing a premium SSD to a standard hard drive to then go and save a further, $15-20 per VM per month. So Nerdio's got a whole bunch of automation that goes and does a lot of the Windows.
So what we're saying that we're optimizing the Azure cloud and the way we're spending it without the IT professionals having to sit there watching all of that. This is happening automatically by the platform, optimizing what's going on, looking at that. And then also you've got automation around what we do as IT professionals, like the patching every month and things. So we optimize again. So there's more and more ways to reduce the cost of running that type of VDI or cloud Windows in the cloud environment all the time. It's very much about the technology stack helping us as professionals.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
I think George and I could sit here for another hour and reel off examples of automation with AVD and Windows 365. It's just, George, you hit the nail on the head. It's whatever you want it to be, right? It's how inventive can you be? You can automate it, right?
Yep.
So I want to bring this all around now. Okay, let's finish this conversation and look forward now. Okay, so the next frontier for councils is integrating AI with Windows in the cloud. This isn't just about technology now. It's about transforming how councils are going to operate and serve their communities, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Serving the community. First, predictive analytics is going to help councils forecast citizen service demand. Imagine being able to anticipate peak times for sort of waste collection or community services and allocate resources proactively. Secondly, intelligent security that's powered by AI can detect and respond to threats much faster, than traditional systems. This is going to strengthen compliance. Again, we've mentioned IRAP and Essential Eight, and this is going to reduce your risk. Thirdly, that enhanced productivity through tools like Microsoft Copilot. And Paul, I'm going to bring you in shortly because you're fresh off Microsoft Ignite. You were there. We've already spoken offline about all the updates. So I'm interested to hear what you got some of that. But yeah, Microsoft Copilot in M365 is going to mean that staff can create reports, draft communications, and analyze data in minutes instead of hours. And finally, before I come to Paul, that data-driven insights, and they're going to allow councils to make better decisions, for planning and community engagement. And AI can uncover patterns in service usage as well, helping councils deliver more targeted and effective services. So, Paul, obviously, I just want to bring you in now. AI is often seen as transformative, but for councils specifically, it needs to deliver practical outcomes. How do you see AI integrated with Windows in the cloud, helping councils move from that sort of reactive to more proactive operations?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. Let me start off by saying I was very lucky to go to Ignite for the week, and I come back, and if I had to sort of summarize that in a sentence, I think the whole conference was really brought home to me that AI is no longer coming, it's here, and it's enterprise ready, right? What Microsoft have released now in the announcements from Ignite is flabbergasting, right? And what's really important though is that they've built in the security and the observability of AI, so we can embed AI into our businesses in all sorts of different ways with that enterprise wrap around it, so we know it's safe and compliant, and we can articulate risk and things. So my summary is that AI is ready for enterprise now. There's no two ways about it. But if I bring that back to today's subject around virtual desktops and you know what we're doing with Windows in the cloud, one of the sessions, and I'll put that in the chat, that blew me away was this concept of agents using virtual desktops. And I was going, well, my first question was, why would you need an agent? Why would an agent need a desktop to do its job? And there's a couple of different scenarios. One's around researching websites and if you've got web apps and things that they might need to navigate to, or legacy applications. So I'll put one of the sessions I attended to in the chat there for you to go and look at. But what we were basically doing, I'll paint the scenario that's in that session, and that's where basically they had this concept of an invoice, say, coming in, and this could be any document that's coming into your environment, and that landed as an email. And it had a PDF on there with this invoice in with some different line items. What AI was able to do in Copilot Studio, and it literally had a couple of lines of instructions. So we're not talking lots of coding or scripting here. We're talking a bit of configuration and a couple of lines of instructions to AI. And what they did there was then, like, we want this invoice to be input into this legacy accounting system. This accounting system has no MCP server, has no APIs that we can call on it. It's just an old-fashioned legacy. So what they did, they put that onto a virtual desktop in Azure, and the agent launches a VM. It launches the VM and it knows to go into the start menu and open that, and then go to the application, open the application, navigate to the navigation's invoice input, and then it entered each line item, right, with the right dates and dollars and numbers and descriptions and all that, and then submitted that into the app. And it did all that without us having to do lots of coding and a lot of instructions, because it was using Microsoft Vision, which is the AI ability to read the screen. And so it navigated and worked out for itself how to open the app and how to enter those figures into the system. So that's just one example, and maybe you've got all sorts of things where you've got legacy systems that we have to manually enter data. We're going to be able to use AI to achieve that, and we're going to do that by using that computer use agent. Wherever we've got something that needs us to, or there'd be a step in the process where you need to interact with a workstation, AI can now do that for us, right? So it was really, really intriguing. And there's lots of other things about things like MCP servers and how we're going to control a repository of them on a Windows computer, and why that's important for AI and automation to be able to access local files safely and securely, and be able to interact with these other MCP servers that, you know, allow us to access enterprise applications and stuff. So super exciting area, and another reason why having a strategy around your Windows in the cloud is important. As we go forward, it isn't just your workforce that is going to need to have virtual desktops for all the scenarios we talked about today, but also AI agents are going to need an area to work in that's safe and secure, and can be spun up and spun down as and when they need it. So yet another reason for us to have that Swiss Army knife of a solution that is AVD and Windows 365.
100%.
Paul, I think that one there is probably one of the best use cases for some of these local government councils, because what I've seen in the past is there are a lot of people that have got really old legacy software. So talking about that data input stuff where you can, you know, train it to do certain tasks is a game changer.
Yeah, what blew me away was the how little instructions you needed to give it to enable that to happen, right? Maybe because it was interpreting what you ask it to do, and then interpreting the screen and when navigating itself through the application, which is a bit mind-blowing, really. But I suppose when you've got that sort of platform capability, it's achievable with AI.
Yeah. So thank you, George. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today. Luca, I want to say thank you for putting this together and this topic. And again, please, anyone who has watched or you're watching the recording, feel free to reach out to myself, George, or Paul with any questions you might have, or if you want to talk further about Windows in the cloud.
Thanks, Shabazz.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.